Her own son left her standing in the rain while he laughed through dinner just feet away. He saw his mother outside the window. He didn't open the door. By morning, she had removed his name from the will, the trust, and every deed he thought he owned. She gave him life. He gave her silence. Now he's on the outside, begging for an inheritance that no longer remembers him. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Ellie Keene stepped out of the Uber with a hydrangea-wrapped box in one hand and her cane in the other. The Pacific Northwest sky had split open, sending thick sheets of rain cascading onto the sidewalk. She tilted her chin toward the storm with an old woman's defiance, and an ex-paralegal's precision-checking her watch, tucking stray hair under her hat, steadying herself before heading up the path. The porch light was off. Odd. Daniel always kept it on during client dinners, even when they ran late. Still, she reached for the doorknob surprised to find it unlocked. She stepped inside the entryway. No voices, no smell of food, just the distant hum of music, muffled by walls and self-importance. "Daniel?" she called out, closing the door behind her. No answer. She stood dripping, unsure, her coat soaked through the back. The gift-a-lemon ricotta pound cake she'd baked that morning tilted slightly in her hand. She pulled out her phone, typed, "Here? Everything okay?" The read receipt came quickly. A pause. Then Daniel's reply blinked onto the screen like a slap. "Just eat without us. Long day." Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, then retracted. The silence of the hallway pressed against her ribs. She slipped off her shoes out of habit, placing them neatly by the console table she'd once bought for them on their 10th anniversary. The table was gone. In its place, a brushed steel console and a sculptural vase that looked like it had never known water or flowers. Ellie stepped deeper into the house, drawn by flickers of light and laughter. Through the edge of the dining room window, half obscured by modern drapes, she saw them Daniel, Brielle, and Lila seated at a long oak table, plates gleaming under warm chandelier light. Brielle swirled a glass of Cabernet as she smiled thinly at something Daniel had said. He carved into a thick steak, chuckling mid-bite. It wasn't a late night at work. It wasn't exhaustion. It was dinner. Ellie stood motionless, the cake box trembling in her hands. Her coat clung to her frame like old grief, wet and heavy and too familiar. Then Lila looked up. Her eyes caught Ellie's through the window. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Rain, candlelight, 17 years of birthday cards, recitals, summer swims, all of it in that gaze. Lila blinked. Then she turned her head. No wave, no acknowledgement, just away. Ellie didn't knock. She didn't call out again. She stepped back onto the porch. Her hat, now soaked through, slid slightly askew as the wind picked up. She adjusted it with a trembling hand. One deep breath. Another. She looked down at the cake box edges, soggy, the ribbon unraveling. Carefully, she set it on the porch bench, straightening it as if it still mattered. And then she sat beside it. Minutes passed. Rain drummed against the wood railing. Cars hissed by in the distance, wipers beating rhythmically like heartbeats she didn't trust anymore. Inside, silver clinked against porcelain. Someone laughed too loud. The music changed a jazz standard she used to play on Sunday mornings while folding laundry. Her phone buzzed again. A calendar reminder. Dinner with Daniel, 6:30 p.m. Bring cake. Wear blue. She didn't delete it. She let it sit there. The street lamp flickered on. A dog barked. Someone across the block pulled into a driveway and greeted a child with a soggy hug. 40 minutes passed. Ellie stood, joints aching from the cold. She straightened her coat, squared her shoulders, and turned toward the street. She didn't look back at the house, not once. As she reached the sidewalk, headlights passed and briefly lit her face lined but unbroken. Water streamed from her hat's brim, trailing down her cheeks like tears that refused to be called such. Behind her, inside the warm house, laughter rose again. And somewhere between steps 2 and 3, a quiet voice in her chest finally asked, "What if I never come back?" Ellie's key slipped in with a metallic sigh, and the door creaked open to her modest rental 2 bedrooms, worn oak floors, and the faint smell of lemon balm she kept drying on the windowsill. Margot's voice floated in from the kitchen. "Took you long enough," her sister called. "You melt in the rain now?" Ellie closed the door with her shoulder and didn't answer. Her coat was heavy with water, her scarf limp around her neck. She stood in the entryway for a moment, too long still, holding on to whatever pride had carried her through the storm. Margot appeared with a towel and a look that could wither stone. She didn't speak, just began patting Ellie down in rough, tender motions. "What happened?" she asked softly, dabbing behind Ellie's ear like she used to when they were kids caught in a downpour without umbrellas. "They were home," Ellie murmured, her voice scratchy from cold and restraint. "Eating steak, laughing." Margot stilled. "They invited you, didn't they?" she said, stepping back. Ellie nodded. "Then they let you stand there like some solicitor?" Margot's voice cracked in disbelief. "Ellie!" Ellie held up a hand. "He thinks I'm already gone." Silence stretched between them, thick as the steam from the soup warming on the stove. Margot turned away, muttering, "That boy has his father's bone structure and none of his backbone." She ladled the soup into a ceramic bowl, set it with purpose on the table. "Sit. Eat. Then we're calling Marcus." Ellie blinked. "Marcus?" Margot looked over her shoulder. "You don't think Arthur knew what kind of man Daniel was becoming? He tried to fix it. You just never wanted to see how far the rot went." Ellie lowered herself into the chair, the wood creaking beneath her, more from tension than age. She took a sip of soup. It tasted like time and home and something older grief, maybe. Later, wrapped in dry clothes and a fleece shawl, Ellie shuffled into the hall closet. She moved past coats and boots until her fingers brushed the metal handle of a fireproof box wedged behind an old vacuum. She brought it to the coffee table. On top, faded marker read, "Will do not open without E." She ran her fingers over the letters. Her nails were clean but soft at the edges now. The kind of hands that once filed motions, wrote letters, held her husband's wrist when the morphine made him slip away. Margot returned with 2 mugs of tea, took one look at the box, and sat down hard. "You really kept it all this time," she whispered. "I couldn't bring myself to look. Not after the funeral. Not after Daniel." Ellie trailed off. But something shifted tonight. The lock clicked open. Reluctant. Inside, documents yellowed at the corners, tabs Arthur had color-coded, and at the bottom, a legal envelope sealed in red wax. Ellie broke the seal. The letter inside was dated 3 weeks before Arthur died. A postscript in his handwriting scrawled across the bottom. "If he tries to take it all, remind him whose name built the damn house." Ellie pulled out a stapled set of Pagashan unsigned amendment. Her breath caught. It detailed property transfers, exclusion clauses, conditional trust. She leaned back, the firelight flickering across her face, illuminating every line earned from decades of careful giving. "He was going to cut Daniel out," Margot said, scanning the pages. Ellie's voice came out low, almost reverent. "He left the door open for me to do it, to finish it if I had to." "You think it's time?" Ellie didn't answer immediately. She looked at the amendment again, then at the rain tapping against the window softer now, more like a rhythm than a threat. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "Maybe it's time to finish what we started." Margot nodded once, as if the storm had passed. "Then we do it right. No drama, no mess, just justice." Ellie folded the letter slowly, deliberately. Her phone buzzed again, Daniel's name on the screen. A single-word message. "Cake?" She didn't reply. Instead, she reached for the landline. "Call Marcus?" Margot asked. Ellie's eyes gleamed. "No," she said. "I'm inviting him over." The cafe was all white marble and reclaimed wood, the kind of place that turned avocado toast into an experience. Ellie arrived early, always did, choosing a table near the window, where the sun spilled across her napkin like spilled wine. A hanging planter swayed gently above her head. She could smell rosemary in the air, not from food, but from whatever upscale candle they had burning near the hostess stand. She wore navy wool and a brooch Arthur had bought her when they still exchanged gifts instead of silent compromises. She placed her phone face down, straightened her water glass, and waited. Daniel was 13 minutes late. "Mom," he said as he approached, arms out like he was already absolved of something. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, barely brushing it. His coat was expensive, his smile even more so. "You look good. Rain didn't get the best of you after all." Ellie returned a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Daniel." He pulled out the chair across from her, sat, and immediately flagged a server. "Let's get her a cappuccino." Oat milk, right? You used to like that. I drink it black now, Ellie said, folding her hands. Daniel chuckled. Tougher than the rest of us, as always. Brielle arrived 2 minutes later, phone in hand, designer sunglasses still perched atop her sleek ponytail. She kissed the air near Ellie's temple and slid into the seat beside Daniel. Sorry. Morning yoga ran over. But God, Ellie, you're radiant. Seattle weather suits. You. Ellie didn't answer. She just reached for her water. Daniel dove into pleasantry show Lila was applying to colleges. How the market was shaky but manageable. How they'd really missed seeing her. Then his tone shifted. You know, he began, stirring his espresso with performative thoughtfulness, I was thinking how remarkable you've been this past year. With Dad gone and everything you've handled, it's inspiring. Ellie said nothing. And I just want you to know, we've been talking. Me and Brielle. Brielle placed a manicured hand on Ellie's arm, gentle and disingenuous. We've found this incredible place, Daniel said. Private suites, on the Sound, views of the Olympics, morning yoga, art therapy. They call it, what was it, Brie? Harbor View Sanctuary, she said, reaching into her leather tote. It's not a facility. It's a lifestyle. She placed a glossy pamphlet in front of Ellie. Soft focus photos of seniors laughing over watercolor palettes and wine tastings. Ellie picked it up with both hands. Peaceful transitions for golden years, she read aloud. Her voice was level, but her left hand trembled just slightly as she turned the page. Daniel leaned in. You deserve peace, Mom. Not whatever that rental is. This is full service. We'd help with the move. And of course, we'd handle the cost. Ellie's eyes didn't lift from the brochure. So I'm easier to forget, she said quietly. Daniel's brow furrowed. That's not what this is. It's about dignity. Brielle jumped in. We saw how hard it was when you came by last week. You were soaked, and it just concerned us. A long pause. Ellie closed the pamphlet, lined up the corners with slow precision, and slid it into her purse. She looked out the window. A man passed by with a bouquet of sunflowers. A child dropped their juice box and began to cry. She turned back to her son. You know, she said gently, your father used to say that the way you treat people in their last chapter reveals everything about how you read them in the beginning. Daniel blinked. What's that supposed to mean? Ellie smiled. Just that I remember every word, even the ones you think I didn't hear. She stood before the check arrived, pulled on her coat without help. We'll talk more, Daniel said, rising halfway. No, Ellie said. We won't. She left them sitting there, her son frowning. Her daughter-in-law reaching reflexively for her phone and stepped back into the daylight, purse heavier than when she'd come. Inside, Brielle flipped the bill closed, muttering, Guess she didn't like the idea. Daniel didn't answer. He was staring at the door Ellie had just walked through. Ellie didn't take off her coat when she got home. The kitchen light clicked on, casting long shadows across the linoleum. She walked past the kettle, past the framed wedding photo near the toaster, and stopped at the old roll-top desk in the corner of the living room, the one Arthur had always kept locked, even after his handwriting began to slip and his sentences wandered. The drawer was still stiff. She took the ring of mismatched keys from the ceramic dish beside it and tried 3 before finding the one that turned with a reluctant sigh. The drawer slid open like an exhale held too long. Inside were meticulously labeled folders, some yellowed, some crisp, all in Arthur's angular script. Tucked between them, a navy blue envelope with a gold seal and a corner faintly singed. Ellie pulled it out slowly. The flap had already been sliced open, but its contents were intact. She slid the pages free legal paper, stamped and notarized, dated September 2019. Her eyes moved down the page, the words burning hotter with every line. In the event of Eleanor's surviving Arthur, Daniel Keene shall not inherit or manage any real estate holdings, in full or in part, unless accompanied by a verified co-signature by Eleanor Keene, witnessed and notarized. This clause supersedes all prior provisions. Her hand tightened slightly on the edge of the paper. Below it were handwritten notes. Arthur's voice caught in ink. Too arrogant. Doesn't listen. If she's alone, protect her especially from him. The final line was underlined twice. Ellie, don't let him bury you before you're gone. She leaned back in her chair, the wood creaking beneath her. and for a long while just listened to the refrigerator hum and the distant groan of pipes. The next morning, Marcus Young arrived precisely at 10. He stepped into her rental with a black briefcase, a faint limp, and the worn dignity of someone who had buried more friends than he cared to count. Ellie offered him coffee. He declined. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table like old colleagues reviewing the body of a lost case. She handed him the documents in silence. Marcus adjusted his glasses, skimmed through, and let out a soft, dry whistle. He always said he was going to lock this down. I just didn't realize he'd done it without telling me. It's real? Ellie asked, voice even but brittle at the edges. Every inch of it. Marcus tapped the notarized page with 2 fingers. As long as you act before the estate formally enters probate, this holds. But once that process starts, everything gets more combative. She stared at the paper. What happens if I take him out completely? Marcus's eyes met hers. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of pause that lets you decide whether to flinch or stay firm. Then it'll be war, he said gently. Real estate, press, probably a countersuit. He'll come after every inch of it. And what if I lose? You won't, he said. But you'll need to be precise, and prepared to be painted as cruel, vindictive. Ellie let that settle. She remembered the way Daniel had smiled yesterday, like she was a cornered burden they'd found a clean solution for. She remembered Brielle's practiced concern, Lila's silence, the stake behind the glass. 40 minutes in the rain. He made his choices, she said, finally. Marcus nodded once. So did Arthur. He knew Daniel better than you wanted to admit. She folded the documents back into the envelope, sealed it with a fresh strip of tape. We'll do it quietly. No fireworks. I can start the trust paperwork today, Marcus said. You'd still retain beneficiary power, but the property would be out of reach. Ellie stood. Her back was stiff, but her voice had sharpened to steel. Let's make sure he understands what that means. As Marcus packed up, she walked to the window. Outside, the wind stirred the maple tree in the yardits, leaves turning orange and gold, fiery even as they fell. Ellie, Marcus said at the door. Are you ready for this? She didn't turn around. I was born ready, she said. I just forgot for a while. Ellie was halfway through organizing a drawer of mismatched Tupperware lids when the call came in. Marcus never called midday. He was a morning man meetings at 9, contracts by noon, voicemail by dinner. She wiped her hands on a towel and answered. Ellie, he said without preamble, did you authorize the sale of the house on Queen Anne? Her heart knocked once against her ribs. What? The marital home. It's listed. I got wind through escrow contacts we have mutuals. Someone's trying to close fast, under a power of attorney. His voice turned grim. Yours. Ellie didn't sit. That's not possible. I never signed power of attorney. Not for Daniel. Not for anyone. Marcus's breath tightened. Then it's fraud. He's either forged it, or he found an old draft and doctored it. Ellie stared out the kitchen window. A jay landed on the fence, squawking as if echoing the alarm. Send me everything, she said. Now. 2 hours later, Marcus sat across from her again, his laptop open, his expression stormy. On the screen, a digital listing her home, her and Arthur's porch swing still visible in the photos, a caption beneath. Charming heritage property with generational value. Must see. Marcus clicked another tab. Purchase agreement. A buyer's ready. Title insurance flagged a gap. That's why we found it. She took a shaky breath. So he tried to sell it while smiling across a brunch table. Not tried. Almost did. If escrow hadn't paused for legal review, it would have been gone next week. Transferred under false pretenses. Ellie didn't tremble. Not this time. She stood, walked slowly to her roll-top desk, and returned with a manila folder. Then we moved faster. Inside, the freshly notarized paperwork from earlier that week, her signature firm, witnesses clear. Arthur's amendment folded behind it like a second heartbeat. Marcus read through the documents and gave a single low whistle. You want to move it into a charitable trust? Yes. And the name? She looked up. The Willow Trust. Marcus nodded. We'll file before the end of the day. That evening, somewhere across town, a potential buyer called Daniel Keene in confusion, her tone icy. I'm out. Your title's a mess. Your mother's name is still on the deed, and now there's a block from a non-profit attorney. Daniel hung up, palms slick. He paced the glass hallway of his condo, city lights flaring behind him like judgment. Brielle appeared in the doorway, wine glass in hand. "You okay?" she asked, brow raised. "She's blocking it," he spat. "She moved the property illegally, I might add, into some charity front. There's no way she even knows how to do that." Brielle set her glass down. "Then maybe someone's helping her." Daniel turned, jaw tight. "Marcus." Brielle tilted her head. "If she has legal cover, we can't undo it cleanly. Maybe we need to reframe things." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. The next morning, Ellie sat in her living room with the blinds open and a pot of Earl Grey steeping when the knock came. She opened the door slowly. Brielle stood on the step, wearing a cream wool coat that cost more than Ellie's rent. Her smile was tight, her eyes sharper than usual. "May I come in?" she asked. Ellie stepped aside without a word. Brielle sat at the edge of the armchair like it might bite. "We don't want this to escalate," she began. "Daniel's upset. This salite wasn't personal. It was practical." Ellie poured her tea, steady hand. "No rush, no apologies." Brielle tried again. "He thought you wouldn't want the maintenance, the taxes, the—" Ellie set the teapot down. The ceramic clinked softly against the tray. Then she looked Brielle in the eye and said, "You're not here because you're concerned. You're here because the buyer walked." Brielle's jaw tensed. This could get ugly, Eleanor. Ellie raised her cup, pinky just barely curled. "Oh, sweetheart." Her voice was silk over steel. "I'm just getting started, dear." Brielle said nothing. She stood, smoothed her coat, and left. As the door clicked shut behind her, Ellie sipped her tea. The headlines hadn't hit yet. The subpoenas hadn't landed. The reckoning hadn't even begun. But the fire was lit. Ellie stepped out of the car with the quiet grace of someone who knew exactly how much space she occupied and chose, deliberately, not to apologize for it. The photography studio was in a renovated Craftsman in Capitol Hill, the kind with whitewashed brick, exposed beams, and a sign out front that read, "Timeless Light, Timeless Families." Margot idled at the curb, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel, eyes tracking every detail like a hawk in pearls. "You sure about this?" she called. Ellie nodded once, smoothing her dark plum coat and adjusting the thin gold chain around her neck. The locket nestled just above her heart, Arthur's picture inside, his initials engraved on the back. She didn't wear it often. Today, it felt like armor. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and cinnamon. The photographer, a young woman with a clipboard and a latte, greeted her with a flash of teeth. "You must be Eleanor. The rest of your family's already in the back. We're just doing some light tests." Ellie followed her through a curtained hallway into a sunlit room where Daniel stood in front of a pale canvas backdrop, buttoning his blazer. Brielle perched on a stool, legs crossed at the ankle, her smile tight and practiced. Lila stood nearby in a navy dress, phone dangling in one hand, her posture saying everything her lips wouldn't. Daniel turned as Ellie entered. "Mom," he said, overly bright. "Glad you made it." Ellie met his eyes and gave him a small, polished smile. "I wouldn't miss a performance." Brielle rose to kiss her cheek, cool as porcelain. "You look lovely. The color suits you." "Grief always did," Ellie murmured. "It goes with everything." The photographer began arranging them. Daniel at center, Brielle on one side, Ellie on the other, Lila in between, like a fragile bridge, spanning generations. Light flooded the space. Lenses clicked. A flash fired. Halfway through the shoot, Daniel raised his voice just enough for the microphone to catch. "We'll frame this for her hallway in the retirement home." Lila flinched. The photographer paused, unsure whether she'd caught a genuine moment or something else entirely. Ellie didn't move. She kept her smile small, unmoved, not cold, but unbothered. She tilted her chin slightly and looked straight into the lens. "Make sure it's a wide shot," she said. "I want to be remembered with plenty of space around me." The photographer blinked. Lila looked down at her shoes. Then came the next cue. "Let's get just the parents now. Daniel, Brielle, stand close. Eleanor, we'll bring you back in for the next round." Daniel turned toward her. "Just one without you, Mom." Without missing a beat, Ellie stepped down from the riser and walked toward the dressing area. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Behind her, the silence was a vacuum. The photo set continued, stilted, over-controlled. Lila stood in the corner, arms folded now, biting the inside of her cheek. Brielle leaned in for a staged laugh, but her eyes never left the spot where Ellie had stood. When it was over, Ellie met Margot back at the car, the locket still shining like defiance in the setting sun. "Well?" Margot asked as she pulled away from the curb. Ellie exhaled slowly, her voice low and unhurried. "I'm giving them enough rope." Margot glanced at her. "To hang themselves?" Ellie looked out the window. "Number to build the gallows. I'll pick the moment." The car turned down a quiet street lined with cherry trees, their green leaves beginning to turn at the tips, that slow creeping blaze before fall. In the back seat, Ellie's phone buzzed a message from Daniel. "Glad you came. Pictures turned out great. Hope you'll come around on everything." She didn't respond. She didn't delete it, either. She opened the locket instead and looked at Arthur's face. Then she closed it gently. She knew exactly what kind of picture she wanted to leave behind, and it wouldn't be one they could frame. The doorbell rang at exactly 4:08 p.m. Ellie opened it to find Lila standing there with a paper bag clutched to her chest and damp socks in her loafers, as if she'd walked the last few blocks instead of waiting for her usual rideshare. Her mascara was smudged, but she hadn't been crying. Not yet. "Hi," she said, voice thin but intact. "I brought Earl Grey, the good kind." Ellie stepped aside. "Kettle's already on." Lila walked in quietly, her movements smaller than usual. She placed the bag on the kitchen counter, eyes darting briefly to the coat rack, the bookshelf, the clock above the sink anywhere but Ellie's face. They sat across from each other, steam rising between them, the silence oddly warm. "He's always talking about time now," Lila said, stirring sugar into her cup even though Ellie knew she hated it sweet. "Deadlines, appraisals, probate windows. He keeps using that phrase, managing the clock." Ellie blinked once. "Your father?" Lila nodded. "Yesterday I heard him on the phone. I wasn't supposed to." She picked at a hangnail, eyes wet now. "He said you're a liability, that he has to tighten the screws before she figures out she still has leverage." Ellie didn't flinch. She simply let the words settle in the air, like ash after a burn. "He doesn't talk about Grandpa at all," Lila added. "Just numbers, deeds, closures, like it's a business deal, not a life." Ellie stood and walked to the desk against the wall, Arthur's old desk, its drawers now familiar. She opened the bottom one and took out the envelope. It was heavier than it had felt before, not in weight, but in consequence. She returned to the table and slid it across the wood between them. "What is this?" Lila asked, voice barely above a whisper. "The real will." "And what came after?" Ellie said softly. "Arthur's final decisions. Some signed, some not, all of them deliberate." Lila pulled out the papers with trembling hands. Her eyes skimmed, then froze. "No real estate. Unless you co-sign?" she whispered, looking up. "Wait, this wash never told me this existed." "No one did," Ellie said. "He left it to me, to decide what to do. I didn't move on it because," she hesitated, "because I thought Daniel might still come around, that maybe grief had made him small." "But he was always like this?" Lila asked. Ellie didn't answer. She didn't need to. Lila stared at the pages, her voice trembling now. "Is it too late? To protect what he doesn't deserve?" Ellie reached across the table, laying her hand over her granddaughter's. Her voice was calm even, but layered with something fierce underneath. "It's never too late," she said, "to remember who you are." Lila blinked hard. "But this still my dad. And you are still my granddaughter," Ellie said. "That doesn't change just because the world does." A long silence stretched between them, full of everything they hadn't said in years-missed holidays, forgotten calls, fractured Sundays. Then, quietly, Lila stood and wrapped her arms around Ellie. It wasn't a dramatic hug. It wasn't cinematic. It was trembling and overdue and real. Ellie let her eyes close for a moment. She could feel Arthur's locket resting between them, warm from her chest, a steady weight. When Lila pulled away, there were 2 spots of color in her cheeks, and something sharper in her eyes. "I want to help," she said. Ellie smiled. "Then you already have." Lila nodded, wiping her nose with her sleeve like she was 5 again. Then her gaze sharpened. Does he know I'm here? No, Ellie said. What happens when he finds out? Ellie reached for her tea and took a slow sip. Her eyes never left Lila's. Then he'll learn what a real liability looks like. Ellie waited until the house had gone still. No tea simmering on the stove, no Margot humming off-key in the next room. Just the quiet click of the grandfather clock in the corner and the slow creak of the floorboards beneath her chair. A pen rested in her hand heavy, gold-tipped, the one Arthur used to sign every major document in their life together. She unfolded the stationery pad. Cream paper. Thick. Tactile. The kind that asked the reader to sit up straight. At the top, she wrote the date in careful cursive. Beneath it, a name. Daniel Keene. Then, with the same poise she'd once used to draft civil rights petitions in a smoky Seattle law office, Ellie began. Daniel, this letter is not for reconciliation. It is for record. You may wish to believe I am bitter, emotional, forgetful, or foolish. You'd be wrong on all counts. I am clear-eyed and deliberate. You have committed fraud. You attempted to sell the Queen Anne property under a forged power of attorney in action now documented, filed, and legally disputed. Enclosed, you'll find the amended trust, Arthur's final estate changes, and a preliminary report from Marcus Young outlining the violation. Do not contact me directly again. Do not attempt to interfere with the transfer of assets now under the Willow Trust. Your legacy is your own. You built it with every silence, every insult, every careless decision. This, too, is yours now. Eleanor M. Keene. She signed it slowly, then slid the letter and the legal documents into a navy envelope, sealing it with a gold sticker, embossed with the Willow Trust insignia. A final flourish. Ellie walked down the hall, knocked once on Margot's bedroom door, and pushed it open. Still awake? She asked softly. Margot sat up in bed, glasses perched low on her nose, a crossword folded on her lap. You finished it. Ellie held up the envelope. I want you to take it, deliver it, to his office, not the house. Margot swung her legs over the side of the bed, already reaching for her boots. Hell yes. Ellie almost smiled. Don't engage. Just hand it to the front desk. Let him stew in it. By 10 the next morning, the envelope sat in a tray labeled Incoming Vertical Bar, Keene Group, Partners Only. Margot didn't linger. She didn't need to. Inside the glass-paneled office suite, Daniel looked up from his desk as Brielle walked in, face pinched. That woman dropped something off, she said. Didn't say a word, not even a glance. Daniel took the envelope, sliced it open, and pulled out the letter. He read the first line, then the second. Then his hands began to tremble. The trust paperwork followed. Arthur's amendment. The cease and desist from Marcus. His eyes narrowed. She's bluffing. Brielle scanned the pages. No, she's not. This is airtight. He stared at the words as if sheer will could make them vanish. His jaw clenched. She's throwing away everything we built. She's protecting what's left, Brielle corrected quietly, then added, under her breath, and maybe we deserve it. That night, Ellie sat by the front window, watching the wind flicker through the street lamp's cone of light. She sipped her tea slowly, turning something over in her hands. A birthday card, Daniel's handwriting on the front, to the world's strongest mom. She opened it. Inside, the same line he used every year. Love you always, D. No story, no joke, no memory, just a placeholder. Ellie tore it straight down the middle, then again, across the crease. The paper crinkled as she dropped the pieces into the fireplace. The flames accepted them without judgment. Her phone rang. She let it buzz twice before answering. Daniel's voice came through like ice. You'll die alone in a rental, and no one will care. Ellie leaned back in her chair, calm and composed. Better than living in a palace built on betrayal. She hung up. The fireplace hissed. The wind outside rose, like a whisper turning into warning. The King County Courthouse smelled like old paper and colder intentions. Echoes of footsteps bounced off the marble as Ellie stepped through security, the Willow Trust pin gleaming on her lapel. She moved with quiet certainty, flanked by Marcus on one side and silence on the other. The courtroom itself was half full. Real estate agents, family office reps, a few journalists in the back with notepads folded closed but pens at the ready. Daniel sat at the opposing table, jaw rigid, arms crossed too tightly for someone who insisted this hearing was Just a formality. Brielle sat beside him, immaculate and unreadable. Her heels didn't touch the floor. Lila was nowhere in sight. Judge Harlan entered without fanfare. Mid-60s, gray ponytail. Reputation for fairness, but no fondness for theatric. "Miss Keene," he said, flipping through the docket. "I understand you're challenging the proposed administration of Arthur Keene's estate on grounds of fraud, undue influence, and unauthorized transaction attempts." "Yes, Your Honor," Ellie replied, her voice clear, unwavering. "That is correct." "And you are representing yourself?" "She is," Marcus interjected. "But I'm here for counsel. Marcus Young, retained in estate trust advisory. All filings have been submitted." Judge Harlan nodded. "Proceed." Ellie stood, slowly but without effort, her hands resting lightly on the table's edge. "My husband left behind a legacy of intention, and my son," she glanced at Daniel, who smirked, left behind a trail of paper. "One of them can be verified. The other can be investigated." She stepped forward. "My objection isn't emotional. It's structural. I am challenging a pattern of behavior designed to erode legal protections and accelerate control before I was ever given a choice." "Objection," Daniel's attorney barked. "Speculative." Judge Harlan waved it off. "She's laying foundation. Let her speak." Ellie turned to the judge. "My son listed our marital home for sale using a fraudulent power of attorney. He approached buyers before probate. He misrepresented title. And he did so while telling me over brunch that he wanted to ease my transition." She paused. He meant into silence. Marcus rose, voice smooth and surgical. "Your Honor, if I may supplement with Exhibit D-14. He clicked his laptop, and a recording played through the courtroom's tinny speakers. Daniel's voice, unmistakably casual. "She's senile. We just need signatures. Get them while—" She still knows her name. Ellie didn't flinch, but the room shifted. A sharp inhale from someone in the back row. The sound of Brielle's legs uncrossing. Daniel's face drained of color. Judge Harlan leaned forward. "That was you, Mr. Keene?" Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. His lawyer stood. "That clip is out of context. It's authenticated," Marcus said coolly. "Time-stamped and submitted through verified channels. Full transcript attached to the filing." The judge looked to Daniel. "Do you have anything to say under oath?" Daniel shook his head slowly, lips pressed thin. "I'm not the villain here," he said quietly, like it might still matter. Judge Harlan looked at Ellie. "Pending full review, I'm issuing a temporary freeze on all inheritance, disbursement, and estate transfers. Any party who attempts to bypass this order will be held in contempt." He slammed the gavel once. Court adjourned. Ellie gathered her things methodically, slow and precise. As she stepped out into the hallway, the first camera flash caught her by surprise. A local reporter asked, "Mrs. Keene, any comment on your son's remarks?" Ellie didn't stop walking, but her answer floated over her shoulder. "He said enough for both of us." Around the corner, just out of frame, Lila waited in the quiet corridor outside a locked courtroom. Her eyes were red but dry. "I testified," she whispered as Ellie approached. "He won't forgive me." Ellie wrapped an arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. "Good," she said softly. "You finally did something worth remembering." They stepped into the elevator together. Back upstairs, Daniel shoved the courtroom door open hard enough to rattle the hinges. Flashbulbs erupted. He raised a hand and barked, "No comment." But the cameras didn't stop. And this time, they weren't pointing at Eleanor. The safe had been broken for years. Arthur had jammed the locking mechanism one spring and vowed to replace it. He never did. Ellie had kept it tucked in the corner of the closet behind boxes of winter coats, untouched, like so many other things they said they'd get around to once the grief softened. But today, the hinge gave with a stubborn groan, the metal creaking open as if it resented the light. Ellie crouched carefully and pulled out 2 envelopes, each thick and sealed with Arthur's wax crest, the monogram they'd designed together when she was still typing briefs in a rented basement office, and he was sketching blueprints on napkins. The ink had bled slightly at the corners, as though even paper had memory. One was marked, Eleanor. The other, Daniel. Beneath them, a single brass key rested inside a folded ledger. Ellie sat down on the edge of the bed, fingers tight around the envelope with her name. She inhaled Onslow, grounding and broke the seal. Arthur's handwriting hadn't changed much. Confident, slanted slightly left, full of the man she'd married, and the regrets he'd never spoken aloud. Ellie, if you're reading this, then you already know more than I ever had the courage to say out loud. I saw Daniel slipping away years before the doctors ever found my shadow on the X-ray. I wanted to fix it. I didn't. But I did leave you something. The ledger inside belongs to the legacy account I opened the year your sister got sick. You remember how scared we were? I never touched it, not once. It was meant for the worst-case storm. If this isn't it, I don't know what is. Instructions are with Marcus. Use it how you see fit. And remind him, if he argues, that I still outrank him. All my love, forever. A. Ellie stared at the final flourish of his signature, her thumb resting gently on the curve of the A. She opened the folded ledger. 3 pages, neatly itemized, 6 figures, untouched for decades, invested, grown, and waiting. A trust account labeled E. Keene, contingency, civic legacy. She didn't cry. Not quite. But her throat ached with something unnameable. Within the hour, Marcus answered her call. We missed something, she said. A legacy account. Civic legacy. There was a pause, then rustling paper. Jesus. He hid that one deep. Old school structuring pre-2000 exemption. I'll pull the full record and run a viability check, but if it's still clean, it is. Then it's yours to move. No, Ellie said, rising to her feet. It's ours to return. 2 weeks later, the Keene Legacy Grant for Senior Empowerment was officially registered, funded, and notarized. Grants targeted toward disenfranchised older adults, those isolated, displaced, forgotten, those told they'd had enough time and should sit down quietly and disappear. Margot suggested they host a kickoff luncheon at the Willow Center. I'll cater, she said. I still remember how to burn a roast with the best of them. Ellie laughed and agreed, then handed Marcus the second envelope. I want this one delivered by courier, she said. No return address, just closure. Daniel received it in his corner office, after everyone had gone home. The envelope sat like a stain on his mahogany desk. He opened it with a sense of entitlement, not dread. Inside, 1 crisp check for $1, and 4 lines of Arthur's unmistakable script. Daniel, you were raised to understand value, not just price. You chose otherwise. This is what remains. Dad. Daniel didn't speak, didn't curse, didn't blink. He just sat there, alone, with the dollar trembling between his fingers as the skyline flickered through glass he no longer owned. The old craftsman home on 18th and Alder had once been a boarding house. The porch sagged, the paint peeled, and ivy strangled the gutters like a secret that had gotten too comfortable. But when Ellie stepped onto the warped boards that first morning, she didn't see rot. She saw potential, stubborn, weathered, and exactly like her. She bought it in cash under her name alone. The Willow Center opened quietly on a Wednesday, flanked by a simple green banner and 2 hand-painted signs made by local seniors from the outreach pilot. No ribbon cutting, no podium, no speeches. Just doors unlocked for the first time in years. Inside, volunteers moved folding chairs into circles. A former schoolteacher offered watercolor classes on Thursdays. A retired electrician ran DIY workshops titled, Yes, You Can Fix That. And at the heart of it all was Lila. Every afternoon after school, she arrived in her gray hoodie and headphones, dropped her backpack in the corner, and sat beside seniors struggling to navigate tablets and password resets. Her patience grew. So did her pride. You don't have to come every day, Ellie said once. I know, Lila replied without looking up, guiding an older man through his first Zoom call. But I want to. One afternoon, Margot emerged from the back office, holding a simple wooden frame in both hands like it contained a historical artifact. She hung it behind the front desk, above the sign-in sheet. Inside it, Daniel's $1 check and Arthur's 4-line letter. Ellie raised an eyebrow. That's a little theatrical, don't you think? Margot grinned. We spent decades biting our tongues. I say we spend the next decade hanging truth on the wall. The day before the garden event, Ellie was adjusting the dedication plaque when Brielle showed up, unannounced. She wore an olive green blazer and heels too high for gravel. Her smile was tight. Ellie, this place, it's very noble. Ellie didn't look up. It's useful. Brielle stepped closer, dropping her voice. Daniel's not well. He's unraveling, losing contracts. Press is circling. You've made your point. Ellie turned then, meeting her eyes without venom. I haven't made my point. I've made my peace. Brielle softened, just slightly. He was raised in your house. Whatever he became part of that is on you, isn't it? Ellie didn't flinch. Maybe. But what I do next is entirely mine. Brielle hesitated. He doesn't sleep. He thinks you'll destroy what's left of him. Ellie nodded, slow and final. Tell him that's his job now. I've done enough carrying. She walked away without another word. The next morning, the garden bloomed like it had been waiting for this moment. Guests arrived, early neighbors, former colleagues, journalists from 2 local outlets. Folded white chairs formed a loose semicircle beneath a tree, now heavy with late summer blossoms. At the center stood a stone bench, simple and clean, engraved with a name that once held a family together. Arthur Malcolm Keene, husband, builder, believer in storms and shelters alike. Ellie stood beside it as Lila handed her a microphone. She didn't speak long, just a few words about love, about memory, about rewriting the last chapter when someone else tries to write it for you. She ended with a toast tea, not champagne and laughter from the crowd mingled with birdsong in the trees. That afternoon, the Seattle Times ran a small headline above the fold. Senior widow reshapes her future and others follow. A week later, a city councilwoman requested a tour. A community grant was approved. The mailbox began filling with letters from daughters, grandsons, caregivers, some angry, some grateful. All of them paying attention. Ellie returned to the lobby that evening to lock up. As she turned the key in the front door, she glanced once more at the frame behind the desk, the dollar, and the letter. No revenge could have said it better. The restaurant was one of Daniel's favorite leak, dimly lit, walls lined with reclaimed wood and award plaques. Ellie hadn't stepped foot in it since Arthur's last birthday. Back then, the table had been full. Tonight, it was a 2-top by the window, pre-reserved in her name. A single candle flickered between them, trying not to drown in the weight of what wasn't being said. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late, as if the delay might reassert some upper hand he'd already lost. He wore his best navy suit. The cuff still bore the monogram Arthur paid extra for when Daniel had landed his first development deal. He looked like success, haunted by the memory of it. Thanks for coming, he said, sitting down without offering his hand. I thought maybe we should clear the air. Ellie adjusted her napkin but said nothing. A waiter appeared, poured the wine Daniel had pre-selected Pinot Noir, too dry for the salmon she already knew she wouldn't finish. The menu had changed, but the table still wobbled slightly, just as it had years ago. They ordered. They waited. Silence stretched between them until the entrees arrived, arranged like offerings neither one wanted to claim. Daniel took one bite, then set his fork down too carefully. Why? He asked finally, his voice low. Why did you do it? Ellie reached into her handbag and placed a thick navy folder on the table. She slid it across the linen like a contract. He didn't open it. Not yet. That's not an answer, he muttered. It's the truth, she said. The rulings, the trust filings, the grant approvals, all of it documented. He flicked the folder open. Inside, the court's freeze order, press clippings, the Willow Trust ledger, and a copy of Arthur's estate amendment. Ellie watched his hands as he leafed through it. They shook, just barely. The same hands that had once built Lego castles in the den. The same hands that had signed her name on false forms. I didn't do this to hurt you, Ellie said softly. I did it to remember who I am. Daniel looked up sharply. Who you are. She nodded. Not the woman who sat in the rain while her son laughed over wine. Not the mother you reduced to a line item. I was someone before I was yours. I still am. Daniel scoffed, the sound bitter and small. You've burned this family to the ground. Ellie didn't blink. No, Daniel. You did. He stared at her, eyes narrowed, but his voice cracked around the edges. You're proud of this? Ruining me in the press? Making a damn museum out of a charity project? I didn't build a museum, she replied. I built a refuge. For who? He snapped. For people who know the difference between inheritance and legacy. Daniel pushed back his chair. You want me to say I'm sorry? No, Ellie said calmly. I want you to live with what you've made. The waiter returned to clear plates barely touched. Ellie stood and reached for her coat, slow and unhurried. As she turned to leave, she paused. One more thing. Daniel looked up. I loved you, every year. Even the hard ones. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them raise the rest of you. I gave you more time than you ever deserved. He said nothing, just stared at the empty plate in front of him like it had betrayed him too. Ellie walked out without looking back. Outside, the air had turned cool. The moon hung low over Seattle's skyline, soft and pale and far beyond the reach of men like Daniel. Across the street, a busker played a slow jazz tune on a battered trumpet. The notes curled into the air like smoke. Ellie pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. At the stoplight, her phone buzzed a message from Lila. Made soup. Want some before I crash? She smiled, just a little, and typed back, on my way. The stage was smaller than Ellie expected. Just a few risers in the community college auditorium, flanked by borrowed ivy plants, and a crooked podium that wobbled slightly when touched. But the seats were full students in caps and gowns, faculty in velvet-trimmed robes, rows of family members holding programs like prayer cards. She stood behind the curtain with her hands folded and her locket warm against her chest. Margot leaned in, whispering like a coach before the final round. You still remember how to take the room? Ellie gave her a side glance. I used to cross-examine attorneys twice my age with a broken heel and bronchitis. I'll be fine. Lila stood nearby, beaming in a Willow Center t-shirt, holding Ellie's phone like a stage manager. They're live-streaming it to the main student center. And TikTok. Just don't say anything cringy. Ellie raised an eyebrow. Define cringy. You'll feel it. Lila grinned. The MC called her name. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Eleanor Keeney, activist, nonprofit founder, and lifelong advocate for people written off too soon. Applause rose like ocean tide as Ellie stepped into the light. She didn't speak right away. She let the room settle, let the quiet stretch just enough for people to lean forward. Then she placed her notes aside and looked out at a sea of expectant eyes. Don't let them put you on pause. Silence. Then, stillness. Charged like a fuse. Ellie continued, voice steady, vibrant. Not your parents, not your professors, not your partners, not even the voice in your head. You will be told by people with titles and power and confidence that your turn is next, or over, or hasn't started. They'll say, wait your turn, or not yet, or worse, you had your chance. She scanned the rows. I lived half my life deferring to men who said my value came from how quiet I could be while being useful. And then one day, I stood in the rain while my family laughed through a window. That's when I realized no one gets to edit you into silence. A pause. You could hear someone shift in their seat. So don't wait. Don't apologize for taking up room. Don't let legacy be something you inherit. Let it be something you create with sharp edges and soft hands, with rage and with grace. She closed her folder, untouched. And if you ever find yourself in the storm, build something. Build it anyway. The crowd didn't erupt right away. It rose slowly, students standing, parents clapping, someone in the back shouting, "Yes, ma'am!" It went viral within 72 hours. At the Willow Center posted a clip with the caption, "Your last chapter is still yours." It hit 500,000 views by Friday, then 1 million. By Sunday, Daniel's firm trended on Twitter, but not in celebration. A local journalist connected his name to recent ethics filings, forged documents, estate irregularities, and sealed court records linked to a whistleblower. The article's headline read, Seattle developer under fire for estate misconduct, family charity surges instead. Brielle filed for legal separation 3 days later. No press release, just a paper trail and a discreet moving truck. Lila packed her bags and moved in with Margot. She kept a photo of Ellie from the graduation stage taped to her mirror with the words, "Build something." Ellie, for her part, didn't gloat. She didn't send the article to Daniel. She didn't call Brielle or toast to her freedom. She simply walked into her attorney's office on Monday morning with a folder full of deeds. "I want everything transferred," she told Marcus. "The Queen Anne property, the Bainbridge parcel, the downtown lot, all of it. Into the Willow Trust." Marcus stared. "You'll have nothing left personally." "I'll have plenty," she said. "What I need doesn't fit in bank accounts." He slid the documents across and handed her a final form. Ellie signed with a flourish, then opened her phone banking app. One last personal account. Balance, 36.1, $7. She transferred all but a single cent. New balance, $0.01. She stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Perfect." Seattle's sky was dry for the first time in days. A rare kind of dry, the kind that smelled faintly of baked concrete and clean air, like the city had finally wrung itself out. Ellie moved through it in a camel wool coat, soft at the collar and crisp at the seams. New but not flashy, practical, the kind of thing someone bought for themselves without needing permission. The sidewalks hummed, with afternoon rhythm buses sighing at curbs, shop bells chiming, the aroma of espresso bleeding from every other doorway. She walked downtown like she belonged to the street itself, like gravity had finally stopped asking her to apologize for standing tall. When she paused, it wasn't out of hesitation. It was recognition. Across the street, nestled between a wine bar and a boutique realtor's office, sat a restaurant she remembered all too well. Its name had changed, modernized, probably for SEO, but the glass walls still offered a perfect view of the corner table by the window. Daniel sat there, alone. No wine this time, just water and a salad he hadn't touched. His suit hung looser now. The tailor's lines sagged at the shoulders. He stared into the street, not at anyone in particular, but he saw her. Of course he did. Their eyes met. He didn't flinch, didn't wave, just watched. So did she. The look wasn't cold. It was settled. A silence between two people who had emptied every word they had for each other. Not forgiveness, not contempt, just history, quiet and complete. Behind her, the crosswalk signal chirped. "Grandma?" Lila's voice rang clear as she jogged up from behind, hoodie tied around her waist, backpack bouncing. "I'm late. Did you forget my tutoring starts at 4:30? Ellie turned, smiled, and gently touched her arm. "No, I was just thinking." Lila grinned. "Don't start getting philosophical on me. You promised snacks." Ellie chuckled. "Snacks, yes. Philosophy, never in public." They walked forward as the light changed, their steps in sync without thinking. Ellie's boots, polished and weatherproof. Lila's sneakers, scuffed but steady. The sidewalk still carried small puddles in its cracks, but neither of them stepped in one. Across the street, Daniel remained motionless behind the glass. The distance between them didn't shrink. It didn't need to. From a corner bus stop bench, half shaded by a newspaper vending machine, Margot watched the whole thing. She wore oversized sunglasses and a navy trench that made her look like someone's sassy detective aunt. She didn't smile, but she nodded once, slow and satisfied. Above them, clouds gathered loosely, but the rain held off. There would always be more storms. Ellie knew that now. But there were also coats that fit, paths that curved forward, and the sound of a granddaughter's voice calling her back to where she was needed. As they reached the corner, Ellie glanced at her reflection in the boutique window coat trim, shoulders square, chin lifted. Behind them, Daniel finally looked down. The world didn't pause. It moved. So did she. They left me outside the will of their hearts, so I rewrote the one that mattered. The garden had just turned. Not yet fall, but no longer summer. The leaves at the edge of the trees curled like they were listening. In the middle of the Willow Center's courtyard, Ellie walked the flagstone path with a slow, deliberate pace. In her hand, a single rose, deep red, thorns still intact. She reached the bench under the crabapple tree now fully in bloom, petals pale pink against the slate sky. It had rained the night before, soft and even, like the city had offered one last rinse before closing a chapter. Arthur's name was etched cleanly into the bench's stone. No dates, just Arthur Malcolm Keene. Husband, builder, believer in storms and shelters alike. Ellie crouched and placed the rose at the base, then stood, back straight, and took out a small, folded note. She read aloud, her voice low but clear. "To those who forget their elders, may memory be your teacher. May absence echo louder than applause. May you learn what silence costs." She folded the page once more and slipped it beneath the rose. The breeze stirred slightly, brushing hair across her cheek. She didn't move to fix it. Instead, she sat on the bench, the stone cool beneath her coat, and opened her leather-bound journal. The pages were soft, worn from entries, notes, quotes, lists of names, clippings from the trust, and half-sketched plans for the spring planting schedule. On the first blank line, she wrote in her practiced, looping script, "I reclaim the storm." Behind her, the willow center door creaked open. Margot walked out carrying 2 paper cups of tea, steam curling from the lids. She wore rain boots with yellow ducks on them and a cardigan draped unevenly over her shoulders. "You're early," Ellie said. "I brought the wrong tea the first time, had to fix it. Some rituals matter." Ellie took the cup. "This one does." Margot sat beside her without asking, brushing some petals off the bench before settling in. A moment later, the side gate clicked. Lila stepped through, her backpack slung lazily over one shoulder, a plastic container balanced in her arms. She looked like everything Ellie had hoped she'd become: messy, certain, curious, and unafraid of showing up. "I made the cookies myself," Lila said, setting them on the bench. "Kind of." "Define made," Margot smirked. "I added the chocolate chips to the pre-made dough." Ellie smiled. "The kind that starts small and anchors deep. Then that counts." They sat together like that, the 3 of them, no speech, no ceremony, just warmth and presence. The garden around them buzzed gently with bees, life, and the kind of quiet that didn't demand to be filled. A squirrel darted past the bench, stopped, stared at the cookies, then reconsidered. From inside the center, soft jazz filtered through the windows. Someone was sweeping. A volunteer, maybe, prepping for tomorrow's workshop on elder housing rights. Ellie had seen the sign-up list; it was already full. She took one of the cookies, broke it in half, and handed the other piece to Margot. Lila leaned against her side, head resting gently against Ellie's shoulder. No one said anything for a long time. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because sometimes being seen was louder than words. The tree above them shed a few more petals. One landed on the journal page Ellie had left open in her lap. She looked down, thumb brushing the stem of her handwriting. Then, as if remembering something worth repeating, she whispered, "They left me outside the will of their hearts, so I rewrote the one that mattered." And the garden, in full bloom, said amen without a sound.